Hey everyone, welcome into Patterns Tell Stories. I'm your host Klaus, and today we're going to be talking about cattle mutilations, covert operations, and the idea of full spectrum dominance. With me today, as always, is my co-host Garrett. How's it going, man?
Good, man. How you doing this week?
A little better. I was sick for a bit. This past weekend was kind of hellish, but I'm feeling a bit better now. So it's interesting to see what's going on in the Congress right now. Chuck Schumer just tweeted saying that he and Senator Rounds, who is his Republican counterpart on this, UAP Disclosure Act bill, Chris Sharp and the people who are tuned into this are going back and forth between it's killed, it's dead, there's hope, and it's kind of a mess right now. And that's the tough thing with doing news segments on podcasts is that shit can change in 2 seconds, and we could just be wasting our fucking time. But we might as well just go over what's happening right now because it seems pretty fluid, the situation, but it's a pretty important time for the subject. It's maybe the most important time, at least in modern history.
Yeah, it's getting intense. So far, from what I've seen, the Liberation Times, that Chris Sharp guy, has been killing it in reporting. Like, in terms of trying to follow this, you, very helpful. Chris Sharp, I think equally, if not more, because everything he's been saying has been on point. And it's so helpful because if you notice, like, he constantly will report news from the DOD that has, like, he asks them very clear questions and looks for very clear answers. And especially when you're trying to follow, like, Elizondo and stuff like that, he got a claim from Susan Go saying that, yes, Elizondo is an advisor for classified topics to our Space Force. I was like, okay, well, that gives me a lot of clarity on the situation and people questioning Lou Elizondo. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's right. Why I kind of dig Chris Sharp, is because, like, that one topic in what you would call ufology is very difficult for people to navigate because there's tons of people that, for whatever reason, don't like Tom DeLonge and don't like To the Stars Academy.
There's a lot of people who don't like Chris Sharp and Ross Coulthard and shit, but they're like the most tuned in, and what they say usually comes to fruition. So, yeah, I trust those guys, and it depends. And even with what they're saying, they're kind of going back and forth on what they're hearing. So, yeah, it seems to be pretty up in the air right now as of, I guess, 8:41 p.m. on Eastern. Fucking, what is today? Monday? Yeah, it was a long fucking weekend. So, but yeah, man, I'm really hoping this goes forward. Apparently, the UAP Disclosure Act was introduced, I guess, back in the summer. It passed the Senate in a pretty big, by a pretty big margin. And I think it was like 80 something to like 11 or some shit. I think that math checks out. But so it passed the Senate, and then now it's in the House. I think we talked about it last time that Mike Turner is the main guy. He's a representative for the district where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is, and he's the main one pushing back on a lot of this stuff. And now I guess Mike Rogers, who has a district down in Huntsville, Alabama, around there. I guess that's where the Redstone Arsenal is. And yeah, let's get into Danny Sheehan a little bit, because he got into the kind of history of the cover-up, and it's stuff that I've talked about and written about in the past that I find really relevant to this, and few people talk about besides him. Danny Sheehan is he's a lawyer, litigated the Pentagon Papers, Silkwood, 3 Mile Island, a whole bunch of public interest cases that he's won and been involved with. So he also previously was the lawyer for the Disclosure Project, I think back in the early 2000s with Stephen Greer. When it comes to Greer, I guess people kind of feel like that might taint him a little bit, but for me, it really doesn't. His history speaks for itself, I think. And he was Lou Elizondo's lawyer, and I don't think he would have done that if he was trying to get something out of it for himself. He seems to be pretty selfless in this whole thing. I trust Danny Sheehan. He might fly off the handle a little much at times, but I think his sentiment is generally correct, and he's coming from a place of truly wanting disclosure, just based on his previous cases he's worked on. That's my take of Danny Sheehan. But yeah, Sheehan was kind of going hard on Mike Rogers, and Grush himself in his Rogan interview said he was a little surprised that Mike Rogers was now kind of holding this thing up as well. But it seemed to turn into kind of like this partisan thing where they tried to substitute Tim Burchett's like one-page paper or like one-page, I don't know, amendment that really just asked for the DOD to declassify known cases. And it seemed like they wanted to pretty much replace the UAP Disclosure Act with this, which is 64 pages, with this one-page thing that didn't really do anything. So that whole thing was kind of weird, caused a whole bunch of shit to go down. And I don't know, man. It's just been kind of a mess, and it's really hard not to like get into the deep politics of this stuff because it's turning into not so bipartisan issue as of late. The whole bipartisan thing is a huge part of this. It's I think it's why it's gotten as far as it has, is that both parties are interested in seeing this get done. But now we have, the Republican majority in the House. Well, Sheehan says they're being threatened, or, at least their funding for their campaign donations are being threatened because, Turner is, Lockheed's a big donor for him because he's basically representing their district. I think their headquarters. I could be wrong.
Right. He had that line. He said something about like, if you're running and you're talking too much about a topic that they don't like, you'll see your campaign opponent get $1 million dropped in their election campaign fund.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. And I was like, wow, because he kept, I'm sorry to cut you off, but he was making interesting points that I really was unaware of. Like you said, representatives potentially being threatened. I don't even really feel it's like, he said something about like, I don't know if he said senators, but he said people were getting guns put in their mouth.
I forget who it was, but I guess previously, maybe it was in a case he was working, but I don't know, it might have been the church committee or something like that. It was in the past. And I guess, the wife of a senator got like pulled out of her house and had a gun shoved in her mouth and was basically like, you need to make your husband stop this investigation. And, yeah, dude, it's wild. So that's kind of the thing that Sheehan's been going after. And I think it's a big part of this that people don't really talk about is the level of retaliation against certain people. So when you think about these House representatives, kind of stopping this bill, you really wonder what kind of pressure they're under. If there's, Sheehan's talking about like legal assassinations, which we kind of touched on with that blue border thing in the past. He's touched on, that one case where, the senator's wife had a gun put in her mouth, like dragged out of her house at like 3 a.m. or some crazy shit.
And he was saying something about drugs, I think, and drug trafficking. And I was like, what? Wasn't he involved in the Pentagon Papers?
Yes.
You remember that? That was him, right? Or he was.
Yeah, he represented the New York Times. Yeah.
Interesting. Damn.
So he knows his shit.
Yeah, that's heavy coming from him.
He's not fucking around, and that's the thing too. Is he's on a tear, and he knows the stakes. He's talking about the fucking genesis of the CIA. That's where we need to start. And that's what he's talking about. Like he's making a point to say that we need to know exactly who we're up against. And he's saying these are fascists who funded, the Third Reich, basically set up, I forget which bank it was. Do you remember that?
I have it written down, bro. I absolutely have.
We talked about this in a previous episode about like breakaway civilizations and shit, and like the genesis and like the original founding of the CIA is a huge part in all this because they are like kind of the original, breakaway civilization type thing that was started before even World War II.
Okay, here we go. I have this from Sheehan. This is from an old Sheehan interview, but this is like pertaining exactly to what we're talking about. Are you ready?
Yeah, he's finally going around and actually saying this like in current day fucking interviews, which I've been waiting for, honestly.
Oh, This is sick. This is exactly what we're talking about. Here we go. It says Sheehan. That's exactly what it is. And that's what had taken control of the United States government. Now, this went on all the way through World War I. When World War I broke out in Europe and the United States came in and became part of this thing up until 1917. Then in 1918, there was the Versailles Treaty that was signed. The Versailles Treaty was supervised by a fellow by the name of Robert Lansing. Robert Lansing was the Secretary of State under Wilson. Robert Lansing was the son-in-law of John W. Foster. John W. Foster was the grandfather of John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. This linkage is extremely powerful because Robert Lansing, who is the Secretary of State for the United States under Wilson at the end of World War I, brought in his two nephews, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, to sit with him in the negotiations of the Versailles Treaty. And they drafted into the treaty the reparations requirements that they imposed on Germany. And what happened, very importantly, those reparations were imposed on Germany, and Allen Dulles, who was the drafter, along with his brother John Foster Dulles, of these provisions, was made the lawyer for Germany by the American Secretary of State at the end of the war. He was also the attorney for Brown Brothers Harriman. So what they did is they organized a series of loans from the individual wealthy families that were members of Brown Brothers Harriman to give loans to Germany to pay the reparations, to pay to corporations that had been injured during World War I. And then they took stock in those companies in Germany. What they did, very importantly, the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman, who was George Herbert Walker, stepped out in 1924 as the CEO and turned it over to his son-in-law, who was Prescott Bush. Prescott Bush became the CEO for Brown Brothers Harriman. George Herbert Walker formed the Union Bank of New York, capitalized by the financiers in the Brown Brothers Harriman, and set up a subsidiary in Germany known as the Bank of Shipping and Commerce with this guy Thyssen that ran it. And they started giving loans to Germany and to the Nazi movement. They financed the construction of the international headquarters of the Nazi Party, that bank system did. And they wanted to set them up as the bulwark against Bolshevism. What had happened is right at the end of the war, and then the interviewer cuts off and says, they prefer fascism. And Sheehan says, that's right. And I'll stop there. But this is one of many interviews he's given that he explains things that, like, if it is baloney, that would be really wild.
He told this whole story on Matt Ford's show this week. He told the whole fucking story. I don't know if you watched it, but he went into every single detail of it. It made me so happy to like post that he was talking about it, because this is the breakaway civilization. This is the quote unquote like deep state. I hate that fucking phrase because it was ruined by you know who, but like it really is a unaccountable covert organization, like loosely based international group of people that have this secret. It's the mechanism that Tom DeLonge talks about that's higher than the CIA. It's not that it's even higher, it's that it's covert. Like that's the thing.
The thing Farrell pointed out to me was mainly about Allen Dulles and how Allen Dulles was an OSS station chief from Switzerland, I believe. And he was like an attorney and a liaison between Germany and the United States. And how Allen Dulles, the OSS, I think that's the Office of Strategic Services, that later on in 1947 became the CIA. And then another part of that was the integration of part of Germany's intelligence apparatus that was called the Gehlen Organization, or the Gehlen Org, and that was Reinhard Gehlen. And there was like, I guess, a whole intelligence infrastructure all throughout Germany that they didn't want to just tear apart. They were like, all right, we're going to just have these guys work for us now. And a lot of it just became like getting these guys like kind of off the hook. I don't want to speak on this like recklessly, but I think that one of the arguments that the United States was making was that, well, they're just going to go to Russia. And that was kind of like a whole like thing that spurred on that Project Paperclip. Was they were really worried that these guys were really intelligent and that they were going to just end up in Russia, who was like happy to take them. I don't know what Russia's argument was for taking those guys or how clear they are with, you know what I mean? Like, I think I know like a dangerously small amount about Russia, and that's kind of weird.
Yeah. So there was another thing that Sheehan talked about that I wanted to review, and he made an emphasis on this term full spectrum dominance. And that's another thing that Joseph Farrell talks about a lot. And it's taken from this paper that was written called Air Force 2025, or an operational analysis for Air Force 2025. Okay, so they basically go through, it was written in 1996, and it's one of those papers where they game out where they want the Air Force to be in the next, I guess, from here, it was 20 years. So like 20 years from now, we want these kinds of technologies. This is our goal. And the main goal is, that term full spectrum dominance, which essentially means control over the entire planet. And this is what Sheehan is saying, that they're willing to give up, freedoms or any other kind of, American value to fulfill this goal of full spectrum dominance. So I'm going to read from Farrell's book, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, real quick. And he brings this in with the context of the UFO phenomenon and, potentially reverse engineered craft. Well, he's talking about the Kardashev system of civilization classification. Essentially, he's saying that UFOs, if we were to reverse engineer them, we would become a class 1 civilization.
And I heard something like that where it's like, if you can use your planet's volcanoes and
exactly
use all of its and then the next one was like the star, like the energy of and make like a Dyson sphere and stuff. Okay.
Yeah. So, all right, I'll just read from that part. In the preface, I noted that the Kardashev system of civilization classification, according to energy requirements, also implied the technological corollary of being able to manipulate the very systems it's required for energy. Thus, a Class 1 civilization implied the technology to manipulate a planet, or at least systems on a planetary scale. A Class 2 civilization implied the ability to manipulate a star and its systems. While finally, a Class 3 civilization implied the ability to manipulate a galaxy and its systems. As noted in the preface, the UFO phenomenon implies at least a Class 1 capability. So does that answer your question? That's
that was way smarter than me.
The theoretical achievement of such technological capabilities, even at a Class 1 level, would result in a new military doctrine, that of full spectrum dominance. And in turn, both doctrine and technologies would engender a new geopolitical imperative. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, a collapse aided and abetted, if not engineered, by the covert system of finance and the factions that controlled it, the Anglo-American core of this breakaway civilization moved quickly to a posture of attempting to dominate the entire planet. This attempt was manifest in the U.S. Pentagon's doctrine of full spectrum dominance. And as its name implied, its agenda was to control everything, everywhere, including the high seas, land, air, space, and even outer space and cyberspace. It is important to note that the implied basis of the sought-after domination was technological. Quote, the strategies of full spectrum dominance envisioned control of pretty much the entire universe, including outer and inner space, from the galaxy to the mind. Full spectrum dominance, in other words, means nothing less than the domination of every potential theater of war via the achievement and maintenance of technological superiority in those theaters, whether that theater is the human mind, planet Earth, nearby local terrestrial space, or outer space. The corollary of this doctrine is the doctrine's so-called escalation dominance, the, quote, ability to win a war at any level of violence, including nuclear war. While this certainly follows from the idea that one can only dominate any potential theater of operations via technological means, it also means that technological end runs around nuclear weapons, strategic weapons of much more destructive potential with much less blowback cost to their user, would be sought as the ultimate means of escalation dominance. Weapons, moreover, that could be deployed with plausible deniability, masking themselves as acts of God or nature. So this is where it gets into like weather warfare. So I'm gonna kind of chill out there, but that's pretty much what they mean by full spectrum dominance. And I think they actually do talk about. let me look at this fucking thing real quick.
So is he saying that like just because that was a lot? So was he just saying that like he made a lot of points, but a couple of the things I was jotting down was like,
sure,
he was saying that this technology demonstrates that you're pretty much able to destroy your planet and that you've, for whatever reason, overcome that impulse. But it shows that like it's that powerful. That was one thing that it was telling me. The other thing it was telling me was like when a nuclear bomb drops, right, there's fallout and radiation and all these like long-term problems that you face like ecologically. and you can clearly tell when a nuclear bomb was used. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no secret nuclear bombs. I feel like our satellites and everything can clearly tell, like, it is that devastating. And it's just like a boiling pussy mess on our planet when a nuclear bomb goes off. It's just so not good for everything, you know? Like, there's no way that radiating all that. I don't know. I don't have to think I have to go on a long rant about how nuclear bombs damage the earth. Like, I think everybody knows that. The other thing, though, was that, like, guys like Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis, the guys that, like, are talked about as being, like, the physicists that know a lot about this, they're also all involved in consciousness things.
Right.
And that was I feel like he was kind of touching on that as well.
You know, they were talking about dominating the mind. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And David Grush, in his interview with Joe Rogan, was talking, I'm not sure if we mentioned it, but he was saying about the remote viewing programs, how those actually might have been outreach to the UFO reverse engineering programs. And that I took to mean personally that, you know, potentially that's what was the means to pilot some of these craft.
Well, that's a big part of Secret Machines, right?
Yeah, well, exactly.
There's a guy, Alan, right? I think his name's Alan. And at least in the fiction, there's a pilot that, like, those books are so sick. I was listening to the audiobooks the other day, and yeah, just on Secret Machines alone, I feel like we could do 5 episodes because but
we should.
That's a big part of those books. They indicate that, like, really advanced aerospace companies are real interested in our brains helping craft move in very quick. You know what I'm saying? Like, we were talking about how much quicker it is to just go straight from the brain, and instead of having them, like, move a little, like, joystick or something. I'm not going to act like I'm a pilot, but I know that that's one thing that, like, they seem very interested in, is, like, using whatever signals our brains give off to make these really advanced aircraft move in just a hair faster than everything else around it. You know, it's like the best reaction time you're capable of having.
Yeah, and that makes me wonder about, again, Vallee's quote saying some canceled projects never really die in the context of MK Ultra. It brings it back again to, like, the super soldier type idea, the Scott Andrews book that apparently is coming out. Are there certain people who have the ability or have the right brain structure to fly these things that others might not have? And are these people sought out in ways that, you know, because you think about the idea of full spectrum dominance and what they might go through in order to keep this stuff secret, as we're seeing play out in Congress right now, where Sheehan is saying all these people are being, you know, they're being fucking threatened, like not even just, campaign donations. It's like this culture of this quote unquote breakaway civilization or covert aspects of our intelligence apparatus that may or may not have oversight, likely not. If they're willing to threaten people over keeping the secret, what are they willing to do to find individuals who may be able to unlock this technology?
I don't want to keep bringing him up every episode, but the fucking I was listening to one of our favorite people, Jack Sarfati, and he was giving an interview and he was talking about his dude. I forget what anybody says about that guy. He's had the craziest life I've ever heard ever. Part of his story is that he got a phone call in 1953. And he said that in 1953 is like a very interesting year. It was the year, if I'm correct, that MK Ultra started, because that speech I sent you where Alan Dulles spoke at Princeton, that was in 1953. He was naming his professors that he had at Cornell. That was like later on in his life. But he was saying that he was doing that after school program thing. And he was saying that, like, it's no surprise that he was being taught by the guys that were, like, involved in the Manhattan Project. Were guys like Robert Wilson, Hans Bethe, and Philip Morrison. Those were 3 of the guys he named. And when I looked up those guys, he was saying that they were all Cornell guys, but they all happened to be involved in, like, nuclear physics. And that was, like, that's an interesting part of, like, this whole Space Kids thing, whatever you think about the guy, he sticks to his story that he got this weird phone call in 1953. He said it was like this like Kundalini like experience, and the information was like, it felt like he was just like, I guess people would call it a download of sorts. Whatever this thing was told him that like in 20 years he would meet the others. And in 20 years later, that's when he was at SRI with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. And like there's audio of those guys interacting. And I don't think they even make any bones about that they were all commingling with each other. At a like really young age, he was involved in this like after school program for like really gifted people or kids. And even today, like I still don't understand that much about like what they were teaching in that type of program or what. But from what he says, he was like working on the most advanced thing you could imagine a 12, 13-year-old kid be working on. I don't really remember what age he was in that program, but I know that he got a full scholarship to Cornell. And a big part of his story is that he was taught by some of the best minds our country had and guys that were involved in working on the atom bomb. Does that make sense, the way I explained that? But like,
yeah, I got it.
I still don't know who other people in that were. We know the Scott Andrews guy. I don't know if I just completely derailed us, but like, I don't know how much of a part of disclosure that type of stuff is going to be. Andrea Puharich, that's another guy we talk about constantly on this show, is like, he supposedly had his own little school of kids that he would do like parapsychological tests on, whatever that means, like remote viewing. And like, I don't think that all of those things are exactly the same, whatever they were.
Yeah, it's Stranger Things.
Stranger Things, dude. It's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I also want to give a shout out to B.A. Crisp. She's a writer. Her books are fiction in the vein of Secret Machines. I'm not sure if you've read her stuff. She's really good. And she also, I guess her grandfather worked in the DOE, and she learned a lot of stuff from him. She basically wrote a fictionalized version of certain things that she had learned. Essentially, the character in her book was similar to kind of Stranger Things a bit, but the character in her book was a troubled adolescent who went through the foster care system, was highly intelligent, got in a lot of trouble. She was given a chance to go essentially to live on basically like a NASA compound. Yeah, it was Stranger Things-esque, where they worked on remote viewing and all this kind of like woo shit. And it was basically like kind of a Star Kids program. You should check out the book. It's really good and funny and really, really well written. But it was basically that kind of thing. And it makes you wonder, like, you know, if they did have these kinds of programs, like what would stop them from going and taking kids kind of out of the foster system who had like no family? It's fucked up to think about, but that's definitely one area where like kids could have been recruited, quote unquote, and no one would ever know. Yeah, super sad.
Isn't that what they do in Stranger Things?
Is it? Like, I don't remember.
With Elle. Elle is 11? Who Millie Bobby Brown is, and apparently
is she a foster kid?
I think in that movie, her mom is like really not doing good.
Yeah.
And a big part of how they portray it is like there's a lot of gaslighting involved with the mom. Stranger Things definitely goes more sinister with it. And if that's the thing with Sarfati, is Sarfati doesn't give the indication that it was sinister. He makes it sound like it was like awesome. Or what, I don't know about awesome, but like it makes it sound like it wasn't like
it was evil, an opportunity as opposed to like, I know. And then, but that's when you get into like the MK Ultra shit, neuro-linguistic programming and the childhood trauma and, kind of forming. It's really, really messy. That kind of shit was happening to like kids where they were having their fucking like memories wiped and like they were being reprogrammed, I guess, to kind of make them think they had a enjoyable childhood while all this fucked up shit was going on and they were being, experimented on. That would be a really nasty fucking thing to have to come clean on.
A big thing I thought about MK Ultra, from what I've read about it, is that they were like burning shit to try to not like like we don't even have a full, complete idea of the entirety of what types of experiments were being done. That's my understanding.
Yeah, if I was gonna burn something, I would go directly to the fucking kids files and start there.
Dude, yeah, of course, like that's crazy. But like, how confirmed is it that they did? Like, I know
these are Nazi scientists, bro. Like, I just like, it's so dark. That's the other thing is like thinking about these NDAs that they've signed. I think Grush even talked about it on Rogan, where it's like you're fresh out of college or whatever, you're recruited because you're super fucking smart, you're a genius, and they think you can benefit and help them progress in some sort of in some fashion to reverse engineer this technology. And they're like basically like, hey, sign this NDA. You're going to work on like the craziest shit ever, but you can never tell anyone about it, and we can't tell you what it is until you've signed it. And then say someone signs that, and then they go into this program and they start. It's crazy, obviously, fucking non-human technology that they're working on, but it's so lonely, and they can't fucking ask like colleagues questions about anything. They're kind of stuck with like blinders on, basically, and they have to like figure this out on their own. And I forget who said it. I think it was Chris Wolford said in a space that like people working at S4 basically felt like they were working in a prison because they couldn't fucking talk to anyone.
And S4 is what Bob Lazar talked about. Yeah. Okay, yep. Got you. Damn.
Yeah. So imagine wild. That. And then it's not really a surprise that there's whistleblowers who want out of this shit.
Well, imagine carrying that around, bro.
Right.
Like your entire life, knowing that there's all sorts of things that they can disclose. They could disclose that UFOs are extraterrestrial, that there's some breakaway weird country thing with AI, like you know what I'm saying? There's all sorts of things that could be like really major and just completely blindside people as to like, whoa, that's really way more intense than I was expecting. I didn't think that it was going to be this crazy.
Oh, like the fucking prions?
Yeah, that's another. Well, I don't know, dude. The prion thing, we could have a whole conversation about that, because
let's do it.
So one of the things that is what would be the word, confounding people, is the phenomenon of cattle mutilations that have been going on since at least, I think, the 1890s is the earliest one I remember like having documentation of.
But the past about 20 years, it's been one 4-foot tall lady. I don't know where she's from. Where's Linda from?
I think she lives in Colorado is where she does her. Actually, no, I think it's out of Vegas or out of Nevada. I'm almost positive it's out of Nevada, but it might be New Mexico too.
Right. Okay. So
anyway,
that's a joke. Sorry, Linda. It's just so fucking funny.
I love her. And so for those who don't know, Linda Howe she had a documentary, I think it came out in the 80s, and it was called A Strange Harvest. And it was one of the most thorough documentaries, if not to this day, I would still consider it the best one in terms of covering exactly what people mean when they say like, oh, have you heard about the cattle mutilations?
Like even just back in May of 2023, there was a huge string of cattle mutilations down in Texas.
This year?
Yeah, May 2023 in Texas. This is The Guardian. Their tongues were cut off, but there was no spilled blood, no signs of struggle, no footprints or tire tracks were found. Investigators were stumped. Who is going on a murderous rampage of cows in Texas? And how are there no clues surrounding their deaths? This seems to be a scene straight out of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. So this is like literally months ago. There was a fucking string of cattle mutilations. So this is happening up to this day. This is a serious thing that needed serious investigation, and no one fucking dug into it deeper than Linda Moulton Howe.
It's brutal. It has to have like I think it's like this may be difficult to watch, like because it kind of is. It's really brutal. I was looking at what parts specifically in a lot of cases were like messed with, and in most cases, sensory organs, the left ear, the rectum, and sex organs are removed. And there's generally not a drop of blood, and no tracks. And they happen like fast. Like there's stories where the farmer will say like, my dog was going crazy. And then I turned around and I looked and like, I saw old Bessie was splayed out. And you're like, what? What are you talking? He said, like, they'll describe that it took place in a matter of like 20, 30 minutes and of them hearing commotion. And then they go to investigate and it's just this like poor animal splayed out. And they don't even know how to make sense of all that. And those parts that we just mentioned are removed. So little Linda Howe was going around in her boots and she was like showing all of these different bodies and being like, hey, interviewing sheriffs, interviewing veterinarians. And the veterinarians are like, yeah, we couldn't replicate this. The sheriffs are like, I think that it's an ET from another dimension or from outer space. I think it's an extraterrestrial from outer space doing this. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what to think of all these people or why they believe this, but these cows, if like, from what I understand, if you go, I'm going to finish this sentence. So,
you got it.
I think that the evidence is strong enough based on what I've seen to say that like, I'm like 99.9% sure that cattle mutilations happen. Who's doing them? I don't know. That's kind of like what we were debating about. Then you had guys like Colm Kelleher, who's
exactly.
like biologist and researcher, and he's indicated that there could be more to cattle mutilations because he was one of the investigators Bigelow had. He, I think, has written that weird things have been found around cattle mutilation sites where people are like, wait, what? Why is this? Why would an alien leave a syringe, or like something bizarre like a gas mask or something like that? I don't know if he specifically mentioned that item, so I would have to double, but I'm pretty positive he has. And but
what's
anyway,
this fucking tampon, dude? Just kidding.
just like I don't know what sort of things you can find because the whole situation is so bizarre. So a lot of the debunkers to cattle mutilations, if I'm playing devil's advocate, they'll say that like it was natural predation. These animals just died by natural causes. Like maybe they had a heart attack and their butthole magically got cored out and disappeared and their eyeball was like I don't know. I don't know how to debunk the mutilations because it's like, I don't know. There's either, I feel like it's either two
butthole
things.
Got magically removed.
Based on what I've seen so
Those
far.
Butthole removal spells in Harry Potter.
Based on what I've seen so far, it seems like the cattle mutilations are either some weird group like of humans or it's something else that we don't quite understand yet that isn't human.
Or it's both.
Yeah, or it's both.
That's what Keller talks about is the, what does he call it? Bidirectional mimicry, I believe.
What is that?
He talked about it on Weaponized. It's kind of fucked up. It's where the government uses the phenomenon to cover up their shit. And then the government, or I'm butchering this. The government uses the phenomenon to cover up like maybe experiments or technology that gets seen. And that again goes back to what Valet says about them using like MK Ultra type stuff or just playing off expectations of what we think we'll see in the sky, essentially. Yeah, it's basically using the phenomenon for their own psyop purposes. It could be something like that going on. And then the phenomenon might use the government programs as a cover. So it's bidirectional and that they kind of mimic each other and use each other to cover up shit. It's pretty fucked up.
Got you. That makes sense.
And it could also be the case with abductions.
Yeah, I suppose it could, couldn't it?
Yeah.
I did want to, just to stay on, we could talk about abductions later, but I wanted to stay on, because you brought up prions.
Yeah, let's talk about TSE. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the weird things, or how should I put it?
Yeah, it's weird. I'd say weird.
No, it's not that I'm looking for an adjective. I'm trying to think of think of it this way. Let's say that for some reason the government wanted to scoop up a farmer's cow and do some sort of analysis on it. Like one of the arguments people make is that they were real worried about stuff like mad cow disease, which comes from, it has to do with prions. It has to do with like the brains and the cells within those brains like being super unhealthy. And I think mad cow disease was like really concerning to people. So I can get how someone would think that the government would be interested in stopping mad cow disease, but it would be an extreme waste of money for them to take some, I don't even know how ungodly expensive it would be to make that type of secret stealth craft. You know what I mean? Like at least hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And then they would have to risk being seen. You know what? Like it's just, whereas they could totally just go up to that farmer and say, hey, we need to test your cow's blood and stuff. Here's 20 grand. And I feel like any farmer would, I don't know if that's, I feel like there's farmers listening that's like, it's at least 45. Like, I'm just throwing out a number, but I feel like whatever.
Where do you get your cows?
Whatever.
Sorry, we're fucking making fun of Southerners. It's so mean.
I live with them.
Oh, that's true. You're Florida.
So,
you're Florida man yourself. But yeah, no, I guess the problem was back in like the 80s, 70s, 60s, Colorado. In the late 60s, there was an epidemic of chronic wasting disease. And well, it's essentially, it's called transmissible spongiform
encephalopathy.
Encephalopathy.
Yeah, that's what I have from playing football is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, I think it's called. I probably just mispronounced it.
Encephalopathy. All right, TSC. That's what it's a general term for infection in humans and animals. It's basically known as chronic wasting disease or scrapie, and it's mad cow disease. Let's just fucking call it mad cow disease.
I thought it came from like cows eating the brains of other cows or something like that, like interspecies problems like that. I don't know. It sounds so dumb.
Sorry. I couldn't hear. Problems? That's the last thing I heard.
I was saying that like I thought that it came from like for a human to have a prion problem. I thought it would come from like eating another human.
Yeah, it's a cannibal problem.
But like,
it's true.
Is that what mad cow disease is? That's my understanding of like what exactly.
We should look this up.
Yeah, let's look it up before we start putting it out to thousands of people. Mad cow.
Well, in humans, it's called like CJD or something. Yeah, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a rare, rapidly worsening brain disorder that causes unique changes in brain tissue and affects muscle coordination, thinking, and memory. And it's a prion disease. So
okay, and a prion is an abnormal pathogenic agent that is transmissible and able to induce abnormal folding of specific normal cellular proteins called prion proteins that are found most abundantly in the brain. The functions of these normal prion proteins are still not completely understood. My argument was that it would be extremely expensive for them to go to all these lengths to scoop up a cow when whatever it costs to purchase that animal would be far cheaper, and I think people would be very willing. So I think that's a very strong argument against that it's the government, for me personally. But with people describing other scenarios, it doesn't always seem that cut and dry.
Here's the thing about that. So if you're like kind of freaking out that there's like mad cow disease and you don't want to set off like this huge fucking panic in the country and like cause like economic harm everywhere, and like everyone's like, oh my fucking God, we all have prion disease, you would want to have an actual specimen from the food supply chain, like, and not like go buy a fucking cow or that's not within that chain that people are actually eating from. You know what I mean? Like you want to have like an actual specimen from that chain, but in order to do that, you don't want to set off a fucking panic if you do that. You know what I mean? So it's like
that's true.
The best way to do it, if you could do it and have the technology to, would be to go like take a covert program and utilize it for that kind of thing. Maybe use the fucking cattle mutilation phenomenon as a cover. And I think that's kind of what Colm Keller is getting at with this bidirectional mimicry.
Damn. But it's not just prions, right? Haven't people made the argument that they're measuring like amounts of radiation? I've heard, I think that argument.
Yeah, it could be. I just know Keller has published a paper on that. And that was one of his conclusions was, let me just read the abstract, just so people know what I'm fucking I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. So the abstract for this paper, it's titled Unexplained Cattle Deaths and the Emergence of TSE Epidemic in North America. All right. We present evidence that a correlation exists between reports of animal mutilation and the emergence of a TSE epidemic in North America. The TSE, that's a prion disease that we were talking about. We show that sharp instruments are used in animal mutilations. Our data contradict the conclusions of the 1980 Rommel report that claimed predators and scavengers could explain reports of cattle mutilations. Using data obtained from a NIDS nationwide survey of bovine veterinarian practitioners, we show that certain organs are preferentially removed during animal mutilations. We focus attention on the temporal and geographical overlaps between the animal mutilation and TSE epidemics in Northeast Colorado. The most highly publicized TSE epidemic in North America, chronic wasting disease, emerged in Northeast Colorado in the late 1960s. We show evidence that patterns of animal mutilations conform to covert but classical wildlife sampling methodologies for infectious diseases. We show evidence in support of an epidemic of prion disease that is both subclinical in cattle and clinical in deer and elk in North America. We describe evidence from 2 laboratories that a number of prion diseases in humans are misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's disease and therefore currently escape detection. The historical record shows that high levels of infectious TSEs were imported from New Guinea into research facilities at Fort Detrick and Bethesda, Maryland after 1958 and were used for intensive cross-species infectivity experiments. We hypothesize that animal mutilations represent both a TSE disease sampling operation on domestic animals and a graphic warning that the beef and venison food chain is compromised. There you go.
Damn.
So that, yeah.
So there's. Oh.
So here's what it means. It means that throughout the 60s, the food chain containing all this shit had prions disease, and that is leading to a lot of cases of Alzheimer's that are being misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's when they're really like this prion disease.
Oh my God.
Yeah, dude, it's fucking gnarly.
That is gnarly.
This took a turn.
Well, but then we have the idea that it's something non-human, which I feel like holds plenty of water. Like, even as shocking as that is, I know that like even if there are cases where maybe it is some program that's monitoring prions, but like the ones that aren't, what is that? Like, what does that mean? And that's something that they talked about in Secret Machines as well. They talk about that in The Fire Within, the novel, because they talk about the crop circles and the cattle mutilations. And they make the point that they might be similar but different reasons these things are occurring. That's one of my favorite parts of Secret Machines, is that it makes the distinction that like there could be many, many things at play right now. Yeah, it's been so I can't imagine trying to read about this in the 60s or 70s. Like John Keel, for example, he talks about in Jadoo, his first book, which is kind of like a little autobiography of him.
I did read that, by the way. It's
nice. Good. I recommend it for everybody. That's a great first John Keel book to read, is because it's like one of the first ones that he published. And he talks about like exploring all these different countries and like learning their traditions. And he said that studying what people call magic, with air quotes, is like, he said that they would almost put you in jail for that in those years. And the fact that we're able to talk about he's passed away now, unfortunately, but like the fact that we're able to talk about these types of ideas is like pretty cool to me. that like people talk about this type of stuff very comfortably, a little too comfortably, if you know what I mean. Like people are like, I'm going to channel the Pleiades in this Twitter space, and you're like, oh, okay.
I mean, I'm doing that after this in an hour.
Like, I'm not making a dig, maybe a little bit of a dig, because like I'm not a big channeler guy. I don't think that like that's a I don't know. That's a whole other debate.
Well, I guess my point of bringing this up is that if the government has indeed used the UFO phenomenon or the cattle mutilation phenomenon or the abduction phenomenon as cover for other heinous things that they have themselves partaken in, that's a whole other level, a whole layer of disclosure that's just going to be another clusterfuck.
Yeah, it would. The problem I have with saying it could be the government, though, is like the MK Ultra stuff was stopped, I thought, with the church committee.
Not according to Jacques Vallée.
Well, I mean, like maybe the CIA stopped whatever, because that's the thing is like I like guys like Kit Green and Jim Semivan, and they appear to make it pretty clear that like they don't do that type of stuff anymore in the CIA. So like I don't want to be saying like, oh, I think it's them secret. You know what I'm saying? I feel like maybe it moved to some other group, and now the CIA is getting pointed at, and they're like, guys, we don't do that. But like
that's the perfect cover, you know?
Yeah.
That is what, yeah. I hate the fucking term the deep state. But like
it's so ambiguous. It
drives me nuts. But like it's very clear if you at least listen to Sheehan, you listen to Vallée, you listen to all these guys, you listen to fucking Joseph Farrell, there is a faction of our intelligence apparatus that has been underground since before World War II that is still calling the shots on a lot of this stuff. Like this shit was not ripped out at the roots. Like according to that book I talk about all the time, Gold Warriors, like the fucking church committee did not fucking rip this out at the roots. They just went underground. They went private. And that's what we're dealing with today is the private industry, is private military intelligence firms. This idea that shit magically just disappeared and now everything's better, you know, maybe on the surface, maybe on certain levels of compartmentalization, that seems to be the case, enough so that there can be plausible deniability. But like the people who are in these covert compartmentalized programs want you to think that it's the whole CIA that's guilty of this, because then they're not the ones getting looked at. The whole CIA is getting looked at, and they can hide in their little corner and keep doing whatever the fuck they want to do and not have to face consequences for this stuff. That's who Sheehan is saying is going after, you know, Congress and who is making these threats. And if you believe Sheehan, which I do, because he's the one who tells this story in a way that like no one else does. And I think in a way that has to be told because it's ugly as fuck and it's going to hurt America once it comes out, if it comes out. And that's going to be a really hard thing for people to process. But this is why Elizondo says, you know, it's the fucking rotten vegetables in the fridge. The longer you leave it in there, the worse it's going to be when you fucking clean it out. So yeah, it's going to suck. But what's the alternative? The same thing happens where you're eroding trust in institutions, where you're just hiding shit. And it's a lot better to come clean about this stuff, even if it is going to be a nightmare initially.
Didn't a lot of this start under Nixon in terms of like the idea to move this into private hands?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, I don't know, I'm no historian, but I don't think Nixon is the most trustworthy president we've had. And like, that's one element of this that's very fascinating to me, is that if it's in the hands of a private company, it's pretty much FOIA proof, Freedom of Information Act. Like you're not able, what's the term? Proprietary. It's considered proprietary information at that point once a private company is in the equation.
Right.
And they even did that with remote viewing, if I'm correct. Like officially, I think it was like out of the government's hands. According to documentation, it was out of the government's hands in, I think, the mid 90s. I want to say like 95.
It went to SAIC, yeah. SAIC.
Yeah, and then you see guys like Joe McMoneagle, and this is like, there's documentation of this. They just went to go work for SAIC and just provide them with like they had no issue finding work because apparently they did a great job, from what I understand. To tie that into what we're dealing with now is whether it's something like a reverse engineered UFO program, crash retrieval program, if it's something like a program that was studying psychic ability or studying people in some like weird, unethical way, whatever the thing that they're accusing them of doing or needing to disclose. How do you think that ties into this legislation currently and how it's like, you get what I'm saying? Like right now, I feel like there's legislation, like if it's passed one way, it's going to be like worded very weak and ambiguously to where people can just avoid having to come forward with whatever information they know. And then there's another way that this legislation could be worded that I feel like Schumer today was very outspoken about, was like, we need to keep the wording as strong as it is. So that way we're able to actually, you get what I'm saying? Like scratch the surface of how to pry this stuff out, because it's going to need like pretty airtight wording in this legislation to make it even feasible to get closer to this information. I hope I didn't butcher that.
No, that makes sense. It's the eminent domain aspect that's the real teeth here.
Okay.
But I do want to read a Luis Elizondo tweet that just came out.
Just now?
Yeah, at 8:52. So an hour ago. We're a little behind the eight ball as we're recording. But he says, have no fear. We already have a plan B, plan C, and so forth. We now know where the vulnerabilities of the beachhead lie and where the incoming fire is from. This is extremely important and valuable for disclosure. Definitely sounds like, I don't know, it might be trying to keep people from being too disappointed, but it also sounds exactly like, what he's been saying this whole time, which is that, there's backup plans to backup plans. That's what Russia's been saying as well. And that goes to, I think I've kind of said it before, where this is a counterintelligence game. It's fucking like 4D chess, basically, where they make a move, then the other people make a move, and then they know how to calibrate and deal with that in their next move, basically. So, but yeah, that's a interesting tweet from Elizondo.
He also tweeted, working very hard behind the scenes. This isn't over yet. He's going hard right now.
Yeah. He is, dude. And that's the thing that drives me nuts about people just shitting on him constantly. It's like, first of all, he's not in the public eye. He hasn't been for like over a year now. So like, chill out. Second of all, we have this legislation that he very clearly assisted in writing. And yeah, man, he's been doing this behind the scenes. It's where he's comfortable. And yeah, people just need to fucking just like back off, man. Like he's working on it.
Well, the problem with him was he was involved in such classified things, like he was involved in a program that like, it sounded like the Pentagon really didn't even want to admit existed. Like they were very, I don't know. I don't want to get too like.
Can we just talk about how stupid this fucking tweet is real quick?
Which one?
I'm just a reply to one of my tweets. I won't say the name, but it's probably just a bot. But I see this all the time. It just says, the government will do a fake UFO attack to make you rely on the government. Like the fucking stupidity of that thought process is, first of all, no one fucking believes in UFOs. So shut up. No one's gonna fucking buy it. Like no one cares. Like 99% of the world does not even fucking consider this a thing. So the government using UFOs as an attack of like some kind of like fucking Independence Day fantasy bullshit is, or like Blue Beam. It's all the same shit. So like false flag UFOs, no, they don't need that. They got like 6 proxy wars going on to justify funding. They don't need fucking aliens. All right. And I guess I'll end it there. Sorry. That should like, I never like reply to that shit. I just had to like get it out.
Well, they accuse him of like essentially treason.
Yeah.
Like they
stolen
fucking
valor, right?
Yeah, they've accused. I've seen like the poor guy, and he doesn't. The problem is that I see is that he was involved in such classified projects or programs. It sounds like if he talks about the things he was involved in its entirety, that he would go to jail. Like the former Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, like who was, what do they call it in the Senate when you're like one of the like highest intelligence? Like there's certain senators that just have like a little bit more access
Oh, the
than
Gang of Eight?
everybody. The Gang of Eight. That's what Harry Reid was spending years to get involved with.
It's the heads of the intelligence committees and the ranking members, and then the majority and minority leaders, I think, for both houses of Congress.
And that's what Harry Reid was in.
Yeah. Well, he's Schumer is he's the majority leader, which is what Harry Reid was. Yeah.
Right. And even Schumer stated when he was coming forward supporting this legislation, which kind of came out of left field to me. I hadn't known Chuck Schumer as to be that guy. And he was like, yeah, this is for my friend Harry Reid, who was very passionate about this subject, are listening closely and trying their best to serve their constituents well in this area at the very least. If they can't pull through in other areas, maybe they can at least work together on this.
All right, man. I think we're good today. You have anything you wanted to talk about or plug or anything?
It wasn't as much about me. It was just something that I felt like was
good.
Hal Puthoff recommended a book, and I was watching an old video of Hal Puthoff. I know this is kind of random, but he recommended a book, and I wanted to mention it on the podcast because I think that it's a pretty interesting book. And it was called Unconventional Flying Objects by a guy named Paul Hill. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it, but I will now.
Yeah, Unconventional Flying Objects. Let me double check. I want to double check to make sure that's what it's called because I can't.
Sounds right to me. I don't have anything I want to plug right now. I need to write an article. It's been a minute. Yeah, I was sick for a bit, but now I'm back. So I'll have that out some point this week. Yeah, I just wanted to express appreciation for people who are signed up for our Patreon and are hanging out in the Discord. I'll be back in there more often now as well, since I'm not feeling like shit. But you got a confirmation on that book name?
Yes, it was Unconventional Flying Objects by Paul Hill. And he was a chief scientist and a chief scientist for NASA Langley Research Center.
Wait, so yeah, check that out. Yeah, man, I think we're good.
Sweet.
And we will see you next week. And hopefully this fucking law passes, but we will see you then.
Thanks, guys.